Welcome to the Golden Crane Award-winning Color Success Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie J. Wong. I am so excited to have Annie Dickerson on the show today. She is an award-winning real estate investing expert with 15 plus years of real estate investing experience. In 2022, Annie was named Real Estate Investor of the Year by the Motley Fool. Annie and her business partner, Julie Lam, are the founders of Goodegg Investments, a company that helps people invest passively in real estate syndications. Together, they have helped thousands of investors, including myself, around the country to invest in commercial real estate assets totaling over $1 billion. $1 billion. Yes, you heard that right. Annie and Julie are authors of the book Investing for Good, the surprising strategy for building wealth while also making an impact. Hosts of the Life and Money Show podcast, which they have generously put me on the show a couple months ago, and creators of the Real Estate Accelerator, an elite mentorship program designed to help people learn how to raise private capital for real estate investments. Thank you so much, Annie, for being on the show today.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here with you and your listeners today, Stephanie.
I am so excited to dive into it because we are talking about some very important topics: money. And again, I am not endorsing, taking the risk, but for people to really consider what this could mean to your life. So, Annie, tell us a little bit more about real estate syndications and what it could do to live your life by design.
Yeah, well, let me maybe start with a little bit of my story, because I sort of just discovered real estate syndications out of the blue. I had no idea that these things even existed a few years ago. And so I started out my career as a fourth grade teacher with Teach for America, then went on to get into game design and instructional design, creating trainings for companies. So real estate wasn't even on my radar until the last few years. And what happened was, as my husband, he's a real estate agent actually, as he started to build his business, he asked for my help and I redid his website. And in the process, I fell in love with real estate investing, but not syndications, just little, small multifamily properties, duplexes and fourplexes and whatnot. And as we started to invest more personally, our friends and family became interested and wanted to come and invest alongside us. But the problem is, with these smaller properties we were investing in, there wasn't really room for me to bring in additional investors. And I didn't really know anything about it at the time. This was 2017, 2018 timeframe. But I said, okay, well, clearly there's a need out there. I have several friends who have expressed to me they want to invest, they just don't have the time. So let me figure out a way to make this happen. So I started to research it. And that's when I discovered this concept of syndications, which is really just a fancy term for group investment. So what I learned was, through a real estate syndication, for example, I could be the sponsor or the lead, and I could find a property, let's say a 100-unit apartment community, and I could bring in a bunch of investors with me as passive investors. So they don't have any role except that they're putting in their own capital. And I do all the work, or the sponsor team does all the work, right? And so as soon as I discovered this, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so genius. So people who have money but don't want to do the work, they can put their money in and they can get a portion of the cash flow and the returns from the sale. So they can focus on their own life, while real estate nerds like me can actually go in, find the properties and revitalize them, and also have an impact on these local communities. And so that's when I fell in love with it. I ditched all the other stuff I was doing with real estate and investing and focused purely on the syndications. And that's what we focus on now.
Absolutely. And the thing about it is, you and Julie make it so easy to learn. And I love free. So I took your free masterclass, and that led me to ordering the book and just solidifying my knowledge, my basic knowledge, and being able to ask questions. And so far we've invested in 2 deals, and the tidbit is my girls and my husband and I sit down and really discuss where we're putting our money. My girls are very young. They're 10 and 7, but I want them to have that knowledge of where their savings are going. What does this actually mean in layperson's terms? So they understand that investments, yes, you can possibly lose money. And at the same time, what are the pros and cons, right? So, and you mentioned people that have money can put money in, but your story is incredible because you were a teacher in your past life and have now created this $1 billion, empire, so to speak. And so how can folks like me, like other working class individuals, create some money to be able to invest in some of these golden deals, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, I think right now is such a relevant time to be talking about this too, with inflation sort of at,
Yes.
all-time highs. And the truth of the matter is you can't save money to build wealth. You can save money to a certain point, but with inflation at these high percentages, you're losing money every day that your money is sitting in a savings account.
Yep.
However, saving is the first step because you can't invest what you don't have.
Right.
And I just read an article about how a third of people who are making $250,000 a year are actually living paycheck to paycheck. Isn't that wild?
And
That
in the
they're
Bay
making,
Area,
yeah,
it's common. It's house
yeah,
poor or rental
exactly.
poor.
Yeah,
to be,
right. Right. And it's not just about how much you make, but it's about how much you have the discipline to save. And so once you save, then you can then move on to say, okay, how can I then use this money and put it to work for me? And so that's where the magic comes in through investing. But that saving is the first key step.
And I have to say that I feel a lot more secure knowing that my portfolio is diversified and that, we got in when you guys were, I would say, like a startup, so to speak, and being able to have that knowledge and getting in on deals when, we see the stock market plunging, we see crypto, you know, pooping out.
Yeah,
And I
all
see
over the
the,
place.
yeah, I see, that's a clinical term. I see the, the commercials about, Bitcoin dying several times and all these things. And, we're young enough to where the economy, I'm optimistic that it'll go back up before we retire. The and part is I only see our house and the real estate syndications being appreciating and more stable as these difficult times come up. And so one of the big things that I have, it's kind of almost stigma for women, Asian American women, to talk about money. And I'm wondering what your take is on the mental models or the perspectives that really hold us from talking about building wealth and also just money in general.
Yeah, it's interesting. I the lessons that I learned about money growing up were very interesting. My parents had two very different takes on money. My mom has always been a saver. Get a penny, save a penny.
Mhm.
Every penny counts, right? She wants to see it all safe right there. She doesn't want it to go anywhere. She has, every dollar has an earmark for, okay, this is for groceries. This is for car payments or whatnot. And my dad was a gambler. And so he would then go to the casinos and he would some nights he would come home and he had just lost, several $1,000s. And so I grew up with two very different viewpoints on money, and I had to figure out my own path. And for a long time, it was something I was intimidated to talk about as well. And in fact, up to the point where I got into this business, I was still scared to talk about money. In fact, when I learned about syndications, I was like, okay, I'll do everything but raise the money. I'm happy to look at the properties. I'm happy to do the spreadsheets and analyze the numbers and manage the asset, but I don't want to talk to people about money. And it was one critical small mindset shift that changed everything for me. And it was when I heard somebody talking about how raising capital isn't about asking people for money. It's about giving people the opportunity that they otherwise might not have to grow their wealth and to create the life that they want. And what I realized through that in all the conversations that I've had since then is that money is not a bad thing. We always talk about, oh, greed is a sin,
Yeah.
but in fact, money allows you to come to the full expression of yourself and your soul and everything that you want. And how great would it be if money were not a factor for people? If you could just live your life the way you want without having to think, oh, I can't buy this today. I'm gonna have to save up and wait for next year to enjoy this thing that I actually want right now. Right. And that's what we're trying to help people to get to, is this point where, hey, if money is not a factor anymore and you could just live your life the way you want, how different would your life be? How would you give back? How would you make an impact? And I think as people grow their wealth, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And once you shift your mindset on that, the conversation changes.
Absolutely. And I don't want people to get the wrong impression like, oh, Annie and Stephanie are, already make money and things like that. I came from very humble background. I mean, my father is and was growing up a grocer, and my mother's a waitress. Pandemic hit, and so I would say retired waitress and a cashier, right? And so I think the idea is we do have to find our own paths, and your company makes it a lot easier to kind of look at those mental models. Because I guess I also wonder, how do you think intersectionality plays a role in having discussions about money? Again, perhaps female, coming from immigrant backgrounds and so forth.
I have a sort of I guess, a life coach, and she recently asked me, what's easier for you? Emotional vulnerability or physical vulnerability?
Mm.
In other words, like when people ask you about, like what's going on inside of you versus having you do something silly externally, which one's easier? And for me personally, it's always been emotional vulnerability has been easier for me.
Mm.
And I think, and I don't know where that comes from exactly, but I think I've always been very introspective. And in fact, in the 10 years after college, I had 9 different jobs because I just kept reflecting on, okay, this isn't the right fit for me because of X. And so let me move on to the next thing, and let me move on to the next thing. And I always knew what I wanted, which was to have as big of an impact as I could. And with each job where I couldn't have that, I would say, okay, then it's on to the next thing. Where can I have that greater impact, until we launch this business? And as you know, being an entrepreneur and having your own business gives you all sorts of opportunities to
Yeah.
have that impact, right? And so I think when it comes to that intersectionality, I think it all plays a role. Being female, being Asian, being an immigrant, coming to this country with, same, we had humble beginnings too. When I was growing up, I still remember this story from when I was really young, when there was an actual day when we didn't have money to buy rice for dinner. And so my dad actually had to sell his camera. He loved this camera, but he had to sell it so that we had money to buy rice for dinner. And so, I saw a lot of that growing up. I saw a lot of perspectives, and I was always very observant. I was always the kid who sat in the back of the bus, didn't say anything, but I listened to everybody else's perspectives. And I think through that, that helped me to find my voice, because it's almost like I tried on all these other people's perspectives. And I was like, does that fit right with me? Does that fit right with me? Um, and eventually through that, I found my own voice. But even within like the Asian American circles that I'm part of, my closest friends are Asian. They're a group of Asian women I've been really close friends with since college. And even within that group, it's difficult to talk about money. I think part of it is the Asian heritage. Part of it is being women. I think as women, we take on a lot. And the risk of potentially losing money, of losing face, of bringing hardship to our families is a heavy, heavy weight. And I see in male circles where they get together, they drink some beers and they talk about what they lost in the stock market that day. And it's no big deal, right? It rolls off their back. They move on to the next thing. But when I get together with my female friends, it's like, oh, nobody wants to talk about money. Nobody wants to talk about investments, even though that's what I do, right? I'm there to help them, but they're still reluctant to talk about it. And I think there's such huge opportunity, which is why we focus on helping more women and moms to get into this. There's such huge, huge opportunity, because when women understand and get into investing, it changes their whole family dynamic, it changes their community, and they bring it to other people that they know.
And you and Julie are literal minorities in the business, and so I guess I wonder, when you go into these deals or discussions or with operators, how do you manage those dynamics? Because clearly it's obvious that you can't hide that you're an Asian American female when you're coming to the table. So have you had to kind of navigate these various parts of your identity in these discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. I still remember when Julie and I met initially it was at a real estate conference, the first one I had ever been to, and it was in Denver, Colorado. And, I had come from the world of design. I was a creative director before this. And, at a design conference, it's mostly women and, a good mix of women and men, I should say, actually. And most of them are younger. They're in hoodies, very casual. And I come into this real estate conference, it's mostly men, mostly Caucasian men in suits, right? And then there's a small group of women, and even fewer of which are Asian women or minority women. And so that's part of the reason why Julie and I instantly connected. We're like, oh my gosh, you're a rarity. And let's sit down and have a conversation. And so, over the years, we've tried multiple different ways to navigate this landscape. And it makes me think of this one moment in, we're big Tony Robbins fans. And there's this one moment in, I think it's his Unleash the Power Within, or it might be Business Master, I can't remember. But there's this one moment where he demonstrates what happens when challenges arise, and he demonstrates it in a very physical way. He has one of the tech people behind the scenes come up, and the tech person is meant to be the problem or the challenge, right? And so the tech person grabs Tony by the arm and really hard, like he really holds on tight. And so Tony says, one way you can do it is sort of just try to fling off the problem, right? But that's hard because the problem is really holding on tight. And so he says, but another way you can do it, and he says, watch this. And so the tech guy is holding on real tight, and Tony does this maneuver where he turns around and then he grabs the tech guy and they start dancing. And it was a great metaphor, right, for how to turn a challenge into an opportunity. And rather than try to fight against it, you find a way to dance with it. And so that's what we've tried to do, is not try to hide the fact that we're Asian, minority, females in this space, but really think about how can we bring a different perspective? How can we use that to our advantage to stand out in a good way, to bring different perspectives to the table that others might not be thinking about? And so I think that's served us quite well in our partnerships.
I agree. And you can clearly tell there's a design person behind all of your marketing materials, the book. I mean, you totally get my color scheme. You obviously see my, my blue mint kind of.
Oh, the mint.
Yes, I love it. One of my favorite colors. So, I think one of the things I'm always looking for, because I have daughters, and they are growing up in a really, really difficult time, things that I really didn't have to think about, or at least didn't want to think about when I was young. And so I'm always looking for new ways to talk with them about money. I saw that you and Julie had started a workshop. They didn't get my instant message when that was going on. So if it comes out again, I will have them go to that. Because they have a vested interest, of course. But how do you recommend that we talk to our children about money at an early age?
Julie and I have both been talking, when we started this business, her kids were, I think they were like 5, 4, and 2, and my kids were 4 and 1.
Mm-hmm.
So really young. But I remember even at that age, I was already talking with my kids about money, because research shows that most of your money habits are formed by the time you're 7, which is pretty scary. But it doesn't have to be just money, like kids understand, even with playing with board games, they have more beads or more coins. And, they understand the economics of saving, or the tensions of like, oh, I can't get this thing in the game yet. Right. So there's lots of ways to start that conversation about collecting, about using different things to get what you want, about figuring out what you actually want versus what you need. And so I think it's about helping children, even young, very young children, to understand to understand that money is not this terrible thing. It's not scary. It's not elusive, but it's actually a part of everyday life. I remember even, I have 2 boys, and they're 9 and 6 now, but when they were 4 and 1, they were like jumping off things. They were like pulling down the curtains, and every opportunity we'd get, we'd sit them down and say, you know what? Those curtains you just pulled down, or that you ripped, or that one time I bought my kids brand new pants, and then 20 minutes later they had taken the scissors and cut right through them. I'm like, okay, let me use this as an opportunity. Let's talk about this.
Let's dance with
And
them and not.
right. Yeah, right. And not get mad at them, but just help them understand, okay, there was a cost to this. And now that we can't use these pants or these curtains the way that we had intended, now what does that mean? Well, now that means that we have to take money that was otherwise going to be used for something else. Now we have to divert that to this. And so at a young age, my kids started to understand that concept, that everything that we do, everything that we use is related to money. And so it wasn't this elusive thing for them. It became a common everyday thing. And so they understood that. So that was sort of the foundation. And then from there, we started to talk about their own money. Okay, how can you get money, and what are the things that you want, and how can you create value for people? That's what I always talk about with my kids is, not how can you, chores are, that's a whole nother conversation that we won't get into here. But some people pay their kids for chores, some people don't believe in that. But either way, right? I always told my kids, it's all about money is about an exchange, right? It's about creating value. If you can create value for people, they'd be happy to exchange their money for the service or the goods that you're providing. And so look around you. There's all sorts of ways to create value for people. Think about what I would want, or your dad would want. How can you help us to make our day-to-day lives easier, or give us something of value? And then we can in turn give you money in exchange for that. Mm-hmm. And so having that conversation with them early on, so they understand the value of money and where money comes from and how that exchange happens. And then giving them the opportunity, once they have some money, to make mistakes. I think that's a big part of it is, if they save up $100 and they buy something that isn't great quality, or isn't what they want, let them do that. Let them experience that. Let them experience, buying something and then the next day finding something else that they want and not having the money for that. Mm-hmm. I gave my kid, so before the pandemic, we did a lemonade stand And it was such a fun little micro business enterprise. And we only got to do it. Well, actually, we did it twice, but the first time that we did it, right? So we only ran the lemonade stand for like, I don't know, maybe 2.5 hours. And some of their friends came to help as well. And it was great. At the end of the thing, my kids counted up all the cash. And I still remember we had it piled up on the dining room table. And they were like, wow, this is more money than I've seen in my life. We're rich, right? And then I said, wait, because they're about to like grab at the stacks of cash. I'm like, well, wait. Pulled out my receipts. I'm like, well, for the cups, that was this amount. Okay, let me pull that away. Okay, for the sugar, the jug, the napkins, all these things, right? And I started to pull the piles away, and they could see firsthand, oh my gosh, there's all these costs to running a business. And it's not all pure profit. There's a startup cost. But then at the end, they were pretty disappointed. They were like, oh, that's it. And I'm like, but look, now that you've paid the startup cost, next time you do this, you don't have to pay for the jug all over again.
That's great.
And so it's giving them opportunities to see for themselves and to have these micro moments where they can really experience money in different ways. I think makes it real for them. And gives them an opportunity to really find their own voice, find their own perspective when it comes to money.
Absolutely. And, a funny story is that we don't go out very much because of the pandemic. And we went to the mall and the kids were I said, okay, $50, you can bring $50 each from your wallet, which is quite a bit of money. But we got home and my youngest, when she was going to sleep, goes, Mom, I'm broke. And I said, oh, well, you're not broke. First of all, you have plenty of money. It's fine. The and part is, it's your birthday coming up. Maybe, maybe you might get some money. He goes, oh, well, Grandpa probably will give me money. He's really nice. And maybe I can make some from Lunar New Year. And I said, that's over. So she thinks of ways, right, of like when people give her money. And we talk about that because when they ask for something, I say, well, the minimum wage that most people get paid when they start a job is X. And then it would take you 2 to 3 hours to make, this amount of money to buy what you want. And I think you're so right. There's these moments where you can really talk to your kids about where money comes from, how to use it, and, what the value is. Because a lot of people and a lot of kids are like, I don't, they're not really thinking about the value of the dollar, right? Which is great to be a kid, right? Because you're thinking, I want this, and so I'm going to get it. And so there are these aspects. I always have to balance, though, like fostering anxiety in my kids too about money. Like, how do you balance that out in your household?
Yeah. It's funny because my two kids are very different. My older one has experienced some of that anxiety. He gets it. He understands the value of money. He understands saving. He's even invested with us in some properties before. And so he gets it. So when he gets money now, he saves. He doesn't know exactly what he's saving for just right now, but he wants to hold on to it in case he wants to invest in something or has an opportunity or has something that he wants to buy. My younger one is very different. You give him $40, he'll spend $40.
Same.
He's like, what, how much money? Because they have debit cards now. He's like, how much money is on my card? Okay, well, that's how much money I'm going to spend today. I'm like, well, what about tomorrow? He's like, oh, well, I'll get more money tomorrow. Like, okay. So clearly there's no anxiety for him. Right. And I think it's about creating that balance for each of them, right? That well-rounded perspective on money. So for the older one, we talk to him about, well, what is it that you're saving for? Or what is your end goal? What are some things that you're building toward to help him know that it's not just on and on forever, because if there's no end goal, it can feel like it's not enough, right? But if you have a goal, and let's say it's $1,000 that he's saving towards, and he has $200 now, then he can see an end in sight and he can say, okay, Well, I'm saving toward this goal. I'm 20% of the way there. And in this next month, I'm going to get this and I'm going to work towards this. And then once I get there, I'm going to do X. So there's a clear plan, which reduces some of that anxiety. With the younger one, not that we want to instill anxiety, but give him a sense of, the longer term plan and the vision for what are some other things that money can be used for. What if you use this money to grow your money instead of spending it outright and then starting all over from scratch? So I think it's about seeing where your kids are at and helping them to think about what are their blind spots? What are some things they're not thinking about to help them create that well-rounded perspective?
Absolutely. So, transitioning a little bit, what is one question that you wish people would ask you, and what would your response be?
Oh, I've thought about this and, I have a very, let's say, non-traditional Asian American journey, especially in terms of my career path. And I wish, I think what I've learned now is about entrepreneurship. And I think if people could ask me, I guess something around the entrepreneurship journey, like when did you know that you wanted to start a business? Something like that, right? And I would tell them I railed against it until the very last moment. As I mentioned, I worked for a period of time in game design, and in the games industry, it's very cutthroat. When you start a business, it's like long hours, you don't sleep, you're at your desk day and night, and you're just trying to make a game that will get small amount of market share. And so when I started toying around with this concept of getting into real estate and starting a business, I was like, I do not want to start a business. I saw all the things over there, I don't want that kind of lifestyle. But what I realized is that you can make it what you want. And once I realized there was a lot of things holding me back from starting a business, and it's all the little things, right? I was like, how do I start an LLC? Where do I get a CPA? Like, how does this work? How does that work? What about when I hire people? Oh my gosh, the taxes and the insurance, all that stuff was holding me back. But once I discovered, the potential and the impact, and this is probably the deeper thing at play, is I recently went to a women's retreat. And the retreat, we were talking about all these emotions, grief and rage and shame and guilt, that particularly as women, we don't get to fully experience all the time, right?
Yeah.
Because from an early age, we're taught, let's put that away, put that in a box. That's too much. Just, sit down and you're good, especially as Asian American women, as an immigrant, it's like, okay, I was always taught from a young age, just sit down and just go with the flow. Don't cause any trouble, don't stand out, just be one of the pack. And during that retreat, I was able to connect with my rage. And a lot of women would say, "Oh, I don't have any rage." And I would challenge that and say, we all have rage at some level. And I think it was the rage that got me over all those little hurdles of what is an LLC? How do I fill out this form? It was the rage around, wait a second, why don't more people know about these syndication opportunities? Why have these been a country club investment for generations? Why have the wealthy, only the wealthiest 1%, known about these opportunities and not shared it with any of the rest of us? How come everyday investors, everyday moms and dads can't invest in these types of opportunities or don't know that they're there? And at some level, that was what this business was born out of, was this rage that, hey, wait a second, we need to share this with more people. And so I think that's the heart of the journey, is this heavy, heavy emotion that then, as it moved through me and moved through Julie, turned into something beautiful.
Yeah.
And
It is
so I
beautiful.
would say for any of the listeners out there, if there's something, I mean, don't be scared of your rage. It's once you move that through and you see what's at the heart of it, there can be something really creative, something that really brings a ton of value to people, something really beautiful and exquisite on the other end of that.
And I think just so productive. And I'm even like, my mind is working as well of like, oh, I should put out a retreat on like looking at mental models about money and things like that, as a psychologist, because I think it really does hold people back. And I think what you're talking about and speaking to is productive rage, of being able to direct that rage and really, like you said, it meaning something, putting it towards this path to help others and give back. And, I think for myself, I've always tried to fight against those stereotypes. I mean, I'm third, fourth gen looking at either side of my family. And so I always knew that I was outside of that box and I never wanted to be put in it. And so sometimes there is overcorrection that happens, and others, it's like, I'm not going to let other people define who I am. And that's taken a lot of work and self-assurance that I can do that. And granted, I'm in the part of my career where I have that ability and more, I guess, authority to say that, because when you are a trainee or there's a power differential there that makes it more difficult, it is harder to speak up and say, no, this is who I am. And nowadays it's more acceptable, but it's like, I can wear eyeliner and false lashes and still, have these deep conversations about money, mental health,
Yeah,
research,
girl.
and all those things. Like that's my,
That's right.
my super woman
Yes.
cape. Right. So,
Mhm.
but I could talk on and on with you about this, and I hope we can stay connected after this. But where can people learn more about Goodegg Investments, the podcast, the book, all the goodies?
Absolutely. Well, for anybody who wants to learn more, the best place to go is goodegginvestments.com. If you're new to the world of syndications, I would recommend two resources that Stephanie has mentioned in the conversation. One is that Passive Real Estate Investor 101 course, which you can sign up for. It's a free 7-day email course. You can sign up for it right there on our homepage. And then the other is our book. It'll give you a start to finish, all the nuts and bolts, everything you need to know to decide if real estate syndications are the right fit for you. And you can get your hardcover copy at goodegginvestments.com/book.
Thank you so much, Annie. And I'm looking forward to also having a conversation with Julie, because I think you guys have such a nice talk about balance in terms of personality and but the passion is the consistent part, and the need and the want to help people. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Indeed. Well, thank you so, so much for having me. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be here with you and your listeners today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the Color Success Podcast. Listen, like, subscribe on all major streaming platforms, YouTube, IG, and if you want exclusive content, you can join our Patreon. All links can be found at colorofsuccesspodcast.com.